Welcome to the pre-show for a Supreme Evening 2021, brought to you by the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. A Supreme Evening is the premier judicial event of the year, celebrating the rich history and important work of the Florida Supreme Court. Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats as the A Supreme Evening pre-show is about to begin.
Good evening and welcome to the 2021 Supreme Evening Pre-Show. I'm Hank Cox from Jacksonville. Sit down. Now, thank you very much. Please be seated. Please, I know you're excited. I will be your host for this evening's festivities. Since this year's event is a virtual affair for the first time, we felt the pre-show would give everyone a chance to log in and get settled before the festivities begin. You think of this as a cocktail reception in the lobby as we used to have them. However, if you have to wait in line where you are now, you have a problem. So just please try to keep the noise down while people are speaking. The Historical Society's Supreme Evening has long been the must-attend event for Florida's legal community and Florida's judicial community, and we hope this year's program, as I said, virtual, will continue that proud tradition and that we'd see you in person again in 2022. While we wait to get started, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of this evening's event.
Our platinum level sponsors: Ackerman, Brannock and Humphreys, Florida Justice Reform Institute, Greenberg Traurig, or Cook, Rigdon, Alexander and Rigdon, Stanley and Susan Rosenblatt, Searcy, Denny, Scorola, Barnhart and Shipley, the Florida Bar. Our gold level sponsors: Bedell Law Firm, Bishop and Mills, Buchanan Ingersoll Rooney, Carlton Fields, Gunster, J. Clausen Law, Edwards and Raggett, Grossman Roth Yaffa Cohen, Holland and Knight, David J. Sales, Terrell Hogan Law Firm, Weiss, Sirota, Helfman, Cole, Bierman. Our silver level sponsors: Boys, Schiller and Flexner, Boyd and Jenneret, Stearns Weaver Miller, Tim Chinaris. And our bronze level sponsors are listed here. We thank you all for your generous support of A Supreme Evening 2021.
We do thank all the sponsors, and we also would like to recognize two particular people who are both sponsors and trustees of this society. We have 75 trustees, but no two stand out more than Susan and Stanley Rosenblatt for their commitment and charitable efforts toward everything this society seeks to do, and we thank them. Throughout the years, the Historical Society has worked steadily to support and preserve the history of Florida's High Court. Preserving the history of the court is one of the Society's primary missions. Today, the public can draw on the wealth of written and video history the Society has assembled, and through the Society's efforts, future generations will be able to better understand the evolution of today's Florida Supreme Court. As part of our pre-show presentation, here's a look at some of the ongoing projects that the Historical Society is involved in.
The Historical Society recently commissioned the production of a virtual tour of the Supreme Court building to support the long-standing docent tour program as a means to reach out to more of the general public. Here are some excerpts.
Hello, I am in front of the Florida Supreme Court building, the state's highest court located in Tallahassee, Florida. The Supreme Court was established in the year 1846, and this building was constructed in the year 1949. Follow me as we take a virtual tour of the Florida Supreme Court. Standing behind me is a model of Lady Justice. You can see that she is wearing a blindfold, which resembles that all cases are fair when they are brought to court. Justice is blind, which means that Someone is not being judged for how they look, what religion they believe in, how old they are when their case comes to the courtroom. And next, I'm very excited to show you our courtroom. And this is the Florida Supreme Court's courtroom. We are open to the public and we can hold 164 people inside this courtroom. Cases are typically scheduled the first week out of each month, with the exception of January and July. This court operates much differently. All of our cases, since they've already been in at least one other court, are ruled by the 7 justices. Our cases are called oral arguments, in which the attorneys and justices communicate back and forth about the case. The attorneys have 20 minutes per side to argue here at the podium in front of the justices, and that time also includes their questions. After the cases, the justices meet in their conference room to discuss and make preliminary decisions on the cases that were just presented to them in the courtroom. A decision on a case is not made public until an order or written opinion is posted, which could take several months. The Florida Constitution states that this court must have 7 justices, at least 1 from each of the 5 district courts of appeal. There is not a minimum age requirement to be a justice in Florida, but they have to have been an attorney in Florida for at least 10 years. The justices serve 6-year terms, and they must retire on or before their 75th birthdays. The Chief Justice sits in the center on the bench, and that is a 2-year position. The closer that a justice sits to the chief, the more seniority they have on this court. The role of the Chief Justice is to manage the judicial branch of government in Florida. The next stop we are going to visit is the Rotunda. Welcome to the Rotundo space in the court. This room is open to the public and is used for events, ceremonies, receptions, but is also used by attorneys when we have cases scheduled in the courtroom. They can meet in this area beforehand and after their cases are heard. In this room, we have 8 marble columns which support our dome in the ceiling, and also includes the Florida Supreme Court seal, which is made of white bronze. And then our next stop is going to be the Florida Supreme Court's library. Our library is Florida's oldest publicly supported library and exists to serve the needs of the Florida Supreme Court, the Office of the Court's Administrator, and Florida's lower courts. Our library contains more than 130,000 volumes of law books and is open to the public Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock.
Welcome to the Rare Book Room. I'm Eric Robinson, the archivist who takes care of this room, and I'd like to show you the oldest and the youngest of the rare books in our library's collection. And I should add that this library is the oldest publicly supported library in Florida. So our rare books are actually books that we bought in the 1800s, many of them, and we've just kept them all these years. We don't use them as much now as we did in the 1800s, but they're here for the justices to be able to go back and see what the laws were at one time. And because they can do that, they have the opportunity to have the fairest and best judgments because of this resource. Now, our oldest book is in Spanish. It's a Spanish law book published in 1597. It was used in the Spanish Empire, and Florida was part of the Spanish Empire. So once in a while, we do go back to this, and we do have people here on staff who can read this very old form of Spanish. And our youngest rare book goes back to only 1947, practically yesterday, right? Well, a long time ago, but not as old as 1597. I want to thank you for stopping to have a look at the oldest books in our collection, and I hope you'll come and visit when we're able to have visitors.
And the last stop of our field trip today will be the Lawyer's Lounge. This room is an area for attorneys to wait before and after their oral arguments, but it also serves as a room for when the courtroom is at capacity. This room also holds our current justices' portraits that hang on the wall over here, and their portraits will remain on this wall until the justice leaves the court. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you back very soon.
Historical Society camera crews are regularly on hand at investitures, retirements, and oral history interviews to capture the comments and personalities of the men and women who shape our state legal legacy.
In the 60s and into the 70s, the Vietnam War was going on and all the protests. And then we had, when I was in law school, we had Richard Nixon as president, and we were angry. We were angry at our country for getting us into the Vietnam War, but we believed in our cause. Yes, I'm optimistic, and I hope that we will have a country that maybe it's always been polarized. And one thing I must say, we say we're the greatest country in the world, greatest democracy. My husband likes to say, were we the greatest country when we took the land away from the Native Americans? Were we the greatest country when we authorized by the Constitution the enslavement of those
Asians?
No, in the South.
Oh.
No, that you're going way farther. The Asians during Korematsu. Were we the greatest country when we enacted Jim Crow laws? We haven't had. We're the greatest country when we had aggression around the world. We have the potential. We are the greatest democracy. We have the greatest constitution, but only because we have this structure. And so I think it's important for us to know that saying that we could do better is that's not a slap against those that went before us, but it's believing in the American dream.
Quite frankly, it is quite intimidating, and I've seen it for myself. When you walk into a situation and you're the only person that looked like you in that situation. I can remember once I even went to a bar association meeting, and it was down in this part of the state. I believe it may have been in West Palm Beach. And I was explaining to them that it's very uncomfortable when you walk into a room and there is no one that looks like you in the room. And so often that was the case with people of color when they walked into a courtroom. The judge would be white. The bailiff would be white. The clerk of court would be white. All the attorneys would be white. And you already have a feeling that, you're not going to get a fair shot. People come to the court to have some of the most serious matters in their lives adjudicated. And they certainly want to not only have the appearance, but have a fair opportunity to present their case and a fair opportunity to have someone really decide the issues based on the facts and the law, and not decide the issues based on how the people feel, or how the executive may feel, or how the legislative may feel. And so it is very important that judges are fair and impartial, that judges make decisions based simply on the facts and the law and the Constitution.
People now forget, it was actually overlaid with the period of Watergate in the federal system, when we had all these federal scandals. But in Florida, we had problems on our cabinet. We had, I think, 3 members of the cabinet who ran into trouble of one kind or another. Askew's own Lieutenant Governor, Tom Adams, got into difficulty because he used state workers to work on his farm. And then we have on the Supreme Court a resignation and the impeachment of 3 justices, and then another resignation. And if you begin to look at the facts behind all those, you begin to see a Supreme Court that's dysfunctional.
The Historical Society also recognizes each member of the court by commissioning an official portrait to be displayed in the Supreme Court building. Here are some excerpts from an unveiling ceremony hosted by the Society.
You would do the honors, thank you.
After the unveiling, the portraits are then put on public display at the Supreme Court building. A Supreme Evening 2021 is the Society's main fundraising effort for the year, and we count on your membership and contributions to help support our educational programs and our work to preserve the Florida Supreme Court's long and vital history. You can support our mission by texting 218-788 to 855-575-7888, and a secure online form will be returned allowing you to renew your membership or make a direct contribution to the Historical Society's mission. You may also visit flcourthistory.org and press the donate button or copy and paste the link located in the Zoom chat box into any internet browser to access the donation form. Your contributions at any level are greatly appreciated and fully tax deductible.
Our Supreme Evening 2021 will begin shortly, and as I promised earlier, we have indeed a marvelous evening planned. We're excited about having our Pulitzer Prize author, about meeting our two newest justices, having a rare presentation of a Lifetime Achievement Award, and the State of the Judiciary report from our Chief Justice. But first, let's take a look back at some insights and commentary from Supreme Evenings of the past.
I told my staff, I would say, the day after swearing in, we'll do a Supreme Court announcement in the morning, and then we will go to the Panhandle for the hurricane. I didn't tell them who, but didn't say anything. So my wife's getting ready for the inaugural ball, and I'm sitting there kind of waiting for her to get, and it's like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and it occurred to me, I've not told anybody who I'm going to appoint tomorrow, including the would-be justice themselves. So I called Barbara and said, you know, if you can be there at 10, I'll put you on the Supreme Court.
The first Chief Justice, John Jay, believed that the Supreme Court would never amount to anything. And he left the Supreme Court 6 years later to run for governor and become governor of New York. John Rutledge, President Washington's recess appointee to replace Jay, never heard a case and was rejected by the Senate. Next, Associate Justice William Cushing was nominated and confirmed by the United States Senate, but as soon as he heard about the confirmation, he said, no, I don't want to do that. And so he declined. He was followed by Oliver Ellsworth, who resigned due to ill health in 1800. But before he left office, Adams nominated John Jay to be the fourth Chief Justice. And he was immediately confirmed. The next day, he was confirmed by the United States Senate. You can see the contrast with today. But when the news got to New York, where John Jay was still governor, he said, what are you thinking? I already told you I don't want that job.
I do not speak out against politicians, but we do speak out against policies, and we will continue to speak out in support of the judiciary at any time that any politician suggests that the independence of the judiciary should in any way be compromised. One more way that the ABA is focusing on public trust is something that I created the day that I became ABA president, and that is called ABA Legal Fact Check. And it is a response to the idea that there can be fake news or alternative facts when it comes to law. ABA Legal Fact Check reflects that there are no alternative facts when it comes to law, that oftentimes there is settled law, and that both the media and the public should have a place where they can find out what that is.
When I was a young lawyer in the middle 1960s in southern Mississippi doing civil rights work, I thought I was at the tail end of the fight for racial justice. I thought I was at the tail end of the fight for civil rights in this country. That's how naive I was when I was 25. We've made enormous progress. When I was in high school in California, in many other states, but in California, it was illegal for people of different races to marry. Still in California, when I was in high school. When I was in grade school, people of different races could not go to school together in many of the states in this country, including in Florida. When I was in elementary school, in most states, women did not have equal rights. They had the right to vote, but they often did not have the right to control their own property. And in most states, it was not a crime to rape your wife or to assault your wife, because rape was defined as forcible intercourse with a person not your spouse. You've seen the courts reform the justice system in terms of making it more equal for people to go to court, whether you are of a different race or a different sexual orientation or different in any other way. You've seen the courts expand the right to privacy, the right to speech, the right to freedom of the press. Landmark decisions from the Florida Supreme Court, from Supreme Court, state Supreme Courts around the country, and from the United States Supreme Court have led the way in making this a more just society and a society more in keeping with a society that our founders articulated but never really practiced.
The Florida Supreme Court Historical Society Publications Department works to save and maintain for future generations the records of the people and events that have shaped the evolution of Florida's court system. In 2020, the semi-annual Historical Review magazine offered an in-depth examination of the historic Bush v. Gore litigation from the perspective of all parties. It also celebrated the 70th anniversary of the Florida Bar through articles on the bar's history and programs. The Historical Review is distributed at no charge to members of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. The Society also publishes the definitive historical record of the Florida Supreme Court in 3 volumes, each covering an era in the court's history: 1811 to 1917, 1917 to 1972, and 1972 to 1987. Each volume examines and records the issues and controversies that faced the court during each era, providing a readable portrait of the history of the state's high court. It brings to life the jurists and lawyers who contributed so much to shaping contemporary Florida law. Visit flcourthistory.org for more information on these Historical Society publications. Welcome to A Supreme Evening 2021, brought to you by the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. A Supreme Evening is the premier judicial event of the year, celebrating the rich history and important work of the Florida Supreme Court. A Supreme Evening 2021 starts now. Welcome, Florida Supreme Court Historical Society President Jon Clausen.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Clausen, and as president of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to a Supreme Evening 2021. The Florida Supreme Court Historical Society's mission is twofold. Number one is to educate the public about the court's role in protecting our rights and freedoms. Number two is to preserve the rich history of Florida's judicial system. While current circumstances prevent us from coming together in person tonight, the Society worked hard to put together an informative and exciting virtual event for your enjoyment. 2020 has been a challenging year for all of us, and we honor and remember those we've lost during this difficult year. I want to thank the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society Board of Trustees, our executive committee, and those members that served on individual committees for their diligent and effective work this past year. Seeing your faces on virtual screens for the last 10 to 11 months have brought a sense of normalcy as well as a sense of comfort to those of us who work together to advance the mission of the Society. Despite the challenges of 2020, the Historical Society was able to move forward with several goals that were set prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll notice that this evening's event contains continuing legal education credits, as well as continuing judicial education credits for both the attorneys and the judiciary that are in attendance tonight. This has long been a goal of the Society, to provide meaningful and educational material both for our members of the Florida Bar, as well as Florida citizens. The Society also met a long-time goal of increasing our social media presence with regular updates provided via Facebook as well as Twitter. We continued our work of honoring and commemorating the sitting Florida Supreme Court justices, as well as those justices who've left the bench, by commissioning portraits for each justice to hang in the court itself. We welcome Justice Jamie Grosshans and Justice John Couriel, and we look forward to working with you to preserve the history of the court. On behalf of our Board of Trustees, a sincere and appreciative thank you to our sponsors tonight. This event could not be possible without your generosity and commitment to the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. We rely on that generosity each year, and given this new and exciting virtual event, we are even more grateful for your continued support. The board would also like to thank the Society Executive Director, Mark Miller, and his team for their unwavering and dedicated work on behalf of the Society. We look forward to a prosperous 2021, and we hope that you will join us for future programs and events this year. I will now pass this evening's event on to Hank Cox, our esteemed and entertaining Master of Ceremonies. Hank is a former president of the Florida Bar, a former president of the Jacksonville Bar Association, as well as a former president of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. Hank?
Thank you, Jonathan, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Supreme Court Historical Society Supreme Evening 2021. And given that we'll be meeting virtually this year, things will be handled differently, but I think you'll find that this is as great an event as we've had ever. The theme of this event is professionalism and leadership. It will be highlighted by some outstanding presentations, all of which you'll enjoy. But before we begin, let's thank the generous sponsors of this evening, without whom this could not be possible.
Our platinum level sponsors: Ackerman, Brannock and Humphreys, Florida Justice Reform Institute, Greenberg Traurig, or Cook, Rigdon, Alexander and Rigdon, Stanley and Susan Rosenblatt, Searcy, Denny, Scorola, Barnhart and Shipley, the Florida Bar. Our gold level sponsors: Bedell Law Firm, Bishop and Mills, Buchanan, Ingersoll Rooney, Carlton Fields, Gunster, J. Clausen Law, Edwards and Raggett, Grossman, Roth, Yaffa, Cohen, Holland and Knight, David J. Sales, Terrell Hogan Law Firm, Weiss, Sirota, Helfman, Cole, Bierman. Our silver level sponsors: Boys, Schiller and Flexner, Boyd and Jennerat, Stearns, Weaver, Miller, Tim Chinaris. And our bronze level sponsors are listed here. We thank you all for your generous support of a Supreme Evening 2021.
– 2020 marked the appointment of two new justices to the Florida Supreme Court, the Honorable John D. Couriel and the Honorable Jamie R. Grosshans. Both justices have agreed to join us for Supreme Evening 2021 and share with us an opportunity to know a little bit more about their backgrounds and their thoughts on leadership and professionalism. Historical Society trustee and Supreme Court Judicial Nominating Commission Chair Fred Karlinski recently spoke with both Justice Couriel and Justice Grosshans. Fred?
Thanks, Hank. I really wish I could be with you there in person. On June 1st of last year, Governor Ron DeSantis appointed Justice John D. Couriel to the Florida Supreme Court to fill the vacancy left by Barbara Lagoa when President Trump appointed Barbara Lagoa to the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Like me, Justice Couriel was born and raised in Miami. He attended Harvard College, where he graduated magna cum laude in 2000. After graduating from Harvard Law School in 2003, Justice Couriel clerked for the Honorable John D. Bates of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia before joining Davis, Polk, and Wardwell in New York. In 2009, he became an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of Florida, where he prosecuted hundreds of federal offenses, including international money laundering, public integrity, healthcare fraud, and human trafficking cases. Justice Couriel spent several years as a partner at Couriel and Kim, where he traveled the world doing complex litigation regarding financial products and services, asset recovery, and government enforcement defenses, mainly focusing on Latin America. Justice Couriel is married to Dr. Rebecca Tunkel, and they have 2 children. They met as competitors on their high school speech and debate team. That really is a great story. That was a brief but very impressive sketch of your legal career, which frankly is very impressive. And hopefully tonight we'll learn a little bit more about you. Good evening, Justice Couriel. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us this evening.
It's my pleasure, Fred. Good to see you.
So let me start by asking you what inspired you to pursue a career in law in the first place?
You know, to be honest, I think it was sort of preordained in a way, in a very good way. I had the good fortune to be born into a family that at least a generation before had been involved in the law. My paternal grandfather had been a lawyer and judge in Cuba, and it felt very much like coming home to follow the same career path here in the United States.
You mentioned your grandfather's role in your deciding to become a lawyer. Were your grandparents influential in other ways as well?
Yeah, you know, I think I had the good fortune of knowing all of my grandparents, actually, and I think that is a tremendous blessing. I think the older I get, the more I appreciate the courage that they had when they were younger than me, actually, and the amount of self-sacrifice that it took for them to leave Cuba, and in the case of my father's side of the family, send my father alone. My father arrived in 1960 as an unaccompanied minor through Operation Pedro Pan, and as the father now of a 9-year-old and an 8-year-old, that seems incomprehensible to me, but in fact, it was absolutely the right call.
Were the circumstances surrounding coming to the United States the same for your mother's side of the family?
My mother's side of the family, they had the good fortune of coming together as sort of a family unit. And they were just very, very brave. They, you know, without any hint of, you know, pretense or we're too good for this, or, you know, they had gone to college in the United States. You know, my maternal grandfather was working at the Bank of Boston Savannah branch, and just like that, the only place for him to work is a 7-Eleven in Miami. And he wasn't too proud for it. He wasn't, you know, it wasn't beneath him. It was what he needed to do to put his family through school.
As you mentioned, your family members are a real strong influence in your life. Who else do you credit with guiding you to the point where you are today?
I'm grateful that I had fantastic teachers all through my life. I had, you know, I had a Catholic education as an elementary school student at St. Timothy's, and then at Christopher Columbus High School. I'm deeply indebted to the Marist brothers of the schools, who were just wonderful in terms of just, you know, getting me ready to take on the things I was going to take on in life. The tradition of Marist education is a great tradition. It's one of, you know, giving everybody the tools they need to succeed. And I had the good fortune of that continuing on in my undergraduate and graduate education and in the profession. I've had wonderful teachers, whether it's, you know, the folks I studied with, my peers as well as my professors, and then my teachers in the law. My judge, John Bates, who's a model public servant, and my first sort of taste of judicial decision making. At Davis Polk, I'm really indebted to people like Andre Skill, who was like my parents, a Cuban-American immigrant. He'd come through Pedro Pan as well, but had been relocated to New York, of all places, went to Princeton, and was a successful corporate lawyer at the very highest level, you know, when that was a tough thing to do. Guy Struve, Scott Muller, Martine Beeman, those are all great Davis Polk influences on me. And then finally, when I sort of moved to Couriel and Kim, I have tremendous respect for my partners there who started a very unconventional and successful law firm.
We're changing topics a bit. What aspect of the law do you find the most intriguing or the most frustrating?
I think it's the same aspect of law is both the most intriguing and the most frustrating, and that is how ultimately, you know, what matters to me both as a jurist and as a lawyer is, you know, the public meaning of the law, what the law means. And that is simultaneously a straightforward exercise and a very vexing exercise. Ultimately, it's the sort of mandate that we all as jurists have to determine not what the legislature intended, because we're not governed in a free society by what any legislator or legislature intends, but what they meant. That is, what are the words of the bargain that they struck and that the executive signed actually mean? And that sounds really straightforward, and sometimes it really is very straightforward, and it serves as a bit of an anchor whenever you're sort of grappling around with, concepts like what do we do here? Well, what did it mean? So that is both a very liberating idea, because I think once you accept that that's what the law is about, you realize that we live in a democracy and have only ourselves to hold accountable for what our legislators do, and it's a very humbling frame to put around the judicial role as well.
The theme of this evening's event is professionalism and leadership. Looking back at your time in private practice and as a U.S. attorney, do any excellent leadership examples stand out?
Yeah, I have an embarrassment of riches on that side for sure. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami, where I was privileged to serve, is populated by some of just the greatest public servants you could imagine. Alex Acosta was the U.S. Attorney who hired me. I admire him greatly. Matt Menschel, who was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Andy Laurie, who was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, wound up becoming my law partners. So I've seen them both as professional role models and as role models of principled public service.
What advice can you give young lawyers on how to take on a leadership role as they move forward in their careers?
So I think there's a really good analogy in medicine. Medical students, my wife is a doctor, but also a medical school teacher, a professor at a medical school. They learn a lesson, see one, do one, teach one, about just about every procedure that they do, and that's pretty good for the law as well. First, watch, right? See one, watch and pick the right mentors to watch. Then do it. Actually get in there and take that deposition, argue that motion, seek an opportunity to do it, and then immediately teach, immediately pass on what you've learned. I think that's the way to sort of gain and distribute knowledge without stepping on toes.
In this age of social media, where what you post on Facebook or Instagram follows you indefinitely, what advice can you offer young lawyers, or frankly, any lawyer, on managing their social media presence in a manner that will not affect them adversely in the future?
I think it's so important to just remember that you're an officer of the court, no matter what you do. Being a lawyer is not like being in other businesses. And it follows you, it should follow you, and I think whether you want it to follow you or not, it does follow you everywhere you go, and that includes online. So I think it requires members of the bar to be extremely judicious about what they say and do publicly and how they hold themselves out, remembering that they represent the cause of justice in our society. And we're all going to slip up, we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to regret something that we've seen or done online, for sure. But I think an awareness of the risk is really important for young lawyers.
Thank you very much, Justice Couriel, for joining us this evening. I'm sure that our entire Supreme Event audience is glad to get to know you a little better. I certainly know that I am.
Thank you very much, Fred.
In 2020, Governor Ron DeSantis appointed another new justice to the Florida Supreme Court, Jamie R. Grosshans. Justice Grosshans served as a prosecutor, an attorney in private practice, and on several lower state courts before being asked to join the Florida Supreme Court. She's agreed to join us tonight so that we can get to know her on a more personal level. Welcome to a Supreme Evening 2021, Justice Grosshans. Can you tell us a little bit more about your early background?
Yes, I went to the University of Mississippi, known more as Ole Miss. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, and that is where I ended up in law school. I met a boy, which I think is very frequently what happens. We both worked together, and then I ended up moving to Florida, to Central Florida, locating there just right after I graduated law school, took the bar exam, and then ended up at the Ninth Circuit State Attorney's Office as a prosecutor. It was my first job straight out of law school.
I understand that after you left the Orange County State Attorney's Office, you went into private practice.
Yes, within a few years, I decided to start my own practice. Not something I ever thought I would do. If you had asked me in law school, hey, will you be doing criminal defense and family law, I would have looked shocked. I never wanted to do that. And then it turned out I loved it. It was such a rewarding part of my career. I felt like I was really being able to assist people in some of their darkest times.
And I've heard that while in private practice, you also taught law at the college level?
I did. I taught hospitality law, which was kind of a smattering of legal-related subjects for people majoring in the hospitality industry.
What was your first appointment to the bench, and what path did you follow on your way to the Florida Supreme Court?
Well, I started out as a county court judge in Orange County, Florida, appointed by Governor Scott. I was then appointed by Governor Scott again to the 5th District Court of Appeal, serving Central Florida on that level, and then was appointed this past September by Governor DeSantis to fill Justice Luck's spot since he was moved to the 11th.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yes, I'm married to an attorney. I have 3 children, all under the age of 12, and 1 very small dog named Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt?
Teddy Roosevelt. He looks a lot like he has the same beard and grumpy expression.
Growing up, did you imagine yourself becoming a lawyer or a judge? Was it a lifelong goal of yours?
You know, there really was not growing up. I grew up in a small southern town. There were a lot of attorneys, but not one female attorney. In fact, I did not meet a female attorney until I went to law school. So that was just not something that I expected to do. I had never met a litigator before I went to law school. It just, you know, that wasn't, I had no lawyers in my family. It just wasn't something that I had expected to do. And then I finished school, I woke up, I said, yeah, I think being a lawyer sounds like an interesting career choice.
Given your background, what unique perspective do you think you've been able to bring to the courtroom?
You know, I think really it was, you know, I was a small practitioner, practicing just on my own, small firm practitioner, which I think is a different perspective than often comes to the court. I know what it's like to have a small firm. I know what it's like to have employees. I know what it's like to bill on that level. And I have really enjoyed being able to bring that perspective to the court. But as far as just informing that decision, it really was what I thought I could do well. I knew that I cared about those subjects. I knew that I would care about my clients, and I wanted to be able to help people in those special times that they really needed some extra help.
Since you started early in your legal career as a county prosecutor and in private practice, what inspired you to work toward becoming a judge?
Yes, so I was in probably my 5th year of practice, and I was at an event in Orange County, and there was a judge, Judge Jon Jordan. He's still on the bench there, and he spoke just at a law-related event there, and really was so expressive and persuasive about people considering this pathway, the service element, and just being able to really give back to the community and to the state. And that was really the first time that I had thought through doing this. I remember looking at my husband and saying, I think I might like to do that someday. And I think that was really a turning point in how I viewed my career, how I viewed things that I was involved in, with that as being more of a goal rather than something that I had never really even thought about before.
The theme of a Supreme Evening this year is professionalism and leadership. If you had to pick a character from literature to embody a good or unique leadership quality, what would it be?
Yeah, I was thinking through characters that I love reading about. And one of them that I've always loved is Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings. You know, this was a friend of someone who was called to do something very noble. And yet he wasn't called. He wasn't asked to do anything. He volunteered. He took a journey. He was loyal. He was faithful. And at the end of the day, he was the one that ended up saving Frodo and throwing that ring into the fire and saving the world. And I always thought that he was an excellent character and that he was true to what he believed in from day one. He was loyal, he was faithful, and I've always really enjoyed his character because he's not the main character. He's not necessarily even the hero that everybody talks about from Lord of the Rings. But in my mind, he plays such a pivotal role in saving the world at the end of the day.
On the topic of professionalism, what advice can you give to our audience on maintaining professionalism in this age of social media where what you post can follow you forever?
What I always tell young lawyers when they ask for advice or thoughts is that your reputation follows you forever. It's very easy to lose a reputation, very difficult to keep it over the years. So always remembering each word matters, each action matters. A client will come and go, a case will come and go, but your reputation is with you forever. And that's something I usually would tell young attorneys, whether they're in the courtroom or in the virtual courtroom.
It was a delight getting to know you a little bit better, Justice Grosshans, and I'm sure the entire audience will join me in wishing you much success during your time on the High Court.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here.
Now back to you, Hank.
Thank you, Fred. And I'd like to welcome the new justices, Justice Grosshans and Justice Couriel, also to the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society as our newest members. We'd like to welcome Justice Polston this evening, Justice LaBarga, Justice Lawson, and Justice Nunes. Finally, it is a personal privilege to introduce an individual who embodies leadership and professionalism in the state of Florida and throughout this nation. He has graciously agreed to share his thoughts on the state of our judiciary. I ask that everyone please rise and welcome the Honorable Charles D. Canady, Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court.
Dear friends, it's good to be with you today to offer some brief observations concerning the state of our court and of the Florida judiciary. As you know, since the last Historical Society dinner, our court has welcomed Justice Couriel and Justice Grosshans to our ranks. We are so delighted that they are on board. I can tell you truly, it would be impossible to find two colleagues who are more collegial. I know that they both will make great contributions to the work of our court throughout the years ahead. It has been a difficult year since we last were together. I know that some of us have personally suffered from COVID-19, and some of us, sadly, have lost people dear to us. And it has been a very challenging time in the practice of law. We all long for this pandemic to be over. Although the Supreme Court and Florida's district courts have certainly had to drastically change the way we do business during the pandemic, we have been able to keep our dockets moving forward without significant interruption. All of us look forward to getting back to the traditional way of conducting oral arguments, but we have found that Zoom arguments have actually worked pretty well. We are grateful that we were able swiftly to pivot to the use of this technology to keep the resolution of cases moving forward in the appellate courts. Unfortunately, the story for our trial courts is a different matter. Although much work has proceeded in our trial courts, due to the constraints imposed by the pandemic, we have been able to conduct only a very small number of trials. And as we all know, although most cases never proceed to trial, many cases will not be resolved until there is the imminent prospect of a trial. So cases in our trial courts are stacking up unresolved. When we are able to resume something like normal operations in the trial courts, our trial court judges will be facing a backlog of unprecedented magnitude. Working through this backlog will be a monumental undertaking. We are now working with legislative leaders to secure additional resources to help us accomplish this task as quickly and efficiently as possible. As difficult and frustrating as the time of the pandemic has been for our court system, we have learned through this time that much work can be done through remote proceedings, and significant reductions in the cost and burdens of litigation can be realized through the use of such proceedings. Going forward, I believe that we can improve the responsiveness, accessibility, and efficiency of our courts through the appropriate use of these means. Traditional in-person proceedings will, of course, remain central to the work of our courts. As we look forward to the post-pandemic world, I am pleased to report on the Society's partnership with the court in studying ways to modernize the court's 175-year-old library. Although we are looking at the library's research support role at the start, we plan later this year to move on to a second topic of study as we investigate ways to create a judicial learning center inside the present library. A consultant with the National Center for State Courts is helping us examine this idea and already has interviewed Society members about it. There are many uses this learning center can serve, including educational outreach and learning programs that draw upon the court's long and rich history. There is an obvious overlap here with the Society's mission that will make the Society an important partner in the development and operation of the Learning Center. Further details will be developed as the National Center's study progresses in the months ahead. In recent days, we have all been given reason to be very proud of the performance of courts all around our country. Relying on reason and facts, courts apply the rule of law without fear or favor. The stark truth is that in the absence of a strong and independent system of courts, the rule of law would die and our nation would soon succumb to the rule of mobs. All of us can be grateful that our courts and other institutions of government are strong and resilient, but we can never forget that none of these institutions are unbreakable. Their long-term viability cannot be sustained without the support and commitment of a people educated in the ways of liberty and constitutional government. Thank you for what you do in educating the people of Florida about the role of our court in our system of constitutional government. Thank you for giving me this opportunity today. Friends, I can't tell you how much I look forward to seeing you in person at next year's Historical Society dinner. In the meantime, please stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, and you may rest assured that we all support you in facing the unique challenges both of this state and the United States of America. This society reserves presentation of its Lifetime Achievement Award on rare occasions. The significance of this award can be measured best by its prior recipients, such as the Honorable Reuben Askew, former governor of the state of Florida, Janet Reno, former Attorney General of the United States, and Sandy Dalembert, former president of the American Bar Association. This year, it was the unanimous vote of the 75 trustees of this society to present the Lifetime Achievement Award to Justice Joseph W. Hatchett. Here are some of his contemporaries with comments on the man we are honoring tonight.
And I remember that sunny afternoon when I asked Joseph Hatchett to come by the mansion, and I was out sitting by the pool, Joe. You probably don't remember this, but I don't have a swimming pool now, Joe. But I remember that visit well, and I came away with such a feeling of satisfaction in being able to give him the opportunity to serve on the High Court, and this is a court of which I have tremendous respect, and I must say again that I commend this Historical Society for perpetuating this effort. So I was extremely pleased to be able to appoint Justice Hatchett. He served this court well. He's gone on and served in the federal judiciary with distinction. You've made us proud as you've made all your family, your beautiful family with you today. And we want to tell you that it's people such as you, Judge, that make the process work. Because if we lose sight of that which we talk about when we talk about trying to resolve differences among people, the compassion, the wisdom, the law that has to be considered, you lose so much of it. So many of those who served had that touch. You had it and you retained it. And so as one that would just happen to be at the right time, at the right place, Judge, your lordships, your ladyship, your high, learned, and exalted federal lordship, and Betty, and this is a happy day for me. 72 is a lot, isn't it, Justice O'Connell? This is the first year yet that I have ever been able to hide my own Easter eggs, and didn't find a one. By my own personal standards, the still relatively young Joseph W. Hatchett is already a living legend in Florida law. Joe Hatchett is a person who lives and has lived by the ethical precepts which historically have guided the conduct of truly great judges and lawyers of our past and present, epitomizing by his professional conduct that which is very, very good about being a free American. Joe Hatchett, to me, exemplifies the best in an American judge, one who sometimes is lonely, but one who never shirks standing alone.
I'm so happy to be participating in the program that's recognizing Joe Hatchett's lifetime achievements. And looking back at Joe Hatchett's life, you can certainly understand why he deserves a Lifetime Achievement Award. His life represents an amazing commitment to fight for justice and equality at a time when the battle for both was stacked against him. His life is an example of patience and perseverance and calmness, but in the face of daily bouts of injustice and unfairness. As early as grade school, I know that Joe was very keenly aware of the civil rights movement and the inequality of segregation. A civics teacher, I think, convinced him that if he was going to, in his words, help America become a better place, the law would be a changing agent. After serving in the Army in West Germany, he went to Howard Law School at a time when Thurgood Marshall, who was then general counsel to the NAACP, would come to Howard to practice his oral arguments. And he must have picked up some pointers because when he started to practice in Daytona Beach, he quickly became known to all of the city and county commissioners and all of the judges. Why? Because, again, in his words, I was bringing the kinds of suits that they had not seen before, and I was before the school board every week, up before the county commission every week, and up before federal judges regularly. Ultimately, Joe was appointed to the Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, where, like Justice Marshall, he was able to work on the civil rights law that he knew so well, but of course from a very different perspective, thankfully for us. After the circuit was split and he became part of the new 11th Circuit, I was then able to serve with him on that court. There I knew him as a colleague and then as my chief judge. And beyond his legal ability and continuing bravery and persistence in the causes of justice, I found him inspirational as a leader. It is not news that organizing or trying to lead a group of judges is said to be like herding cats. Joe was a paragon of steadiness and calmness, no matter what difficulty arose in the circuit or in the court. His external gentleness and calmness is wrapped around a steel core of dedication to equality and justice. His contribution to both of those ideals in Florida and in this country throughout his life is immeasurable, and he totally deserves to be recognized for his achievements throughout his lifetime. Congratulations, Joe. I wish we could all be there in person to hug you while we say congratulations.
Now, let us join Lifetime Achievement Award winner Jack Harkness, former executive director of the Florida Bar and my good friend, as he sits with Justice Hatchett in his home.
Thank you, Hank, for the kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Before we present Justice Hatchett with his award, let me give you a few details of his background. He graduated from Florida A&M University in 1954. He served as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. He earned his law degree from Howard University School of Law and entered into private practice in Daytona Beach. He was appointed Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Florida, was designated as the first Assistant U.S. Attorney, and was later appointed as United States Magistrate for the Middle District. When Governor Reuben Askew appointed him to the Florida Supreme Court in 1975, Justice Hatchett became the first African-American appointed to the Florida Supreme Court since Reconstruction. 3 years later, President Jimmy Carter nominated him to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. In 1981, he continued his role on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the newly created 11th Circuit, where he served as Chief Judge from 1996 to 1999. After 3 decades of judicial service, he retired from the federal bench and went into private practice, joining the Ackerman Law Firm as a senior partner. After 20 years, he now enjoys the title of retired partner. Justice Hatchett, congratulations on the well-deserved honor of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Historical Society. What would you like to say to the Historical Society and the Florida Bar members who are watching you via this live broadcast of a Supreme Court evening?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say to all the people of Florida and to the Florida Bar is thank you. This is a substantial honor, and especially when it comes from having given public service. And so I'm very grateful for this award. Thank you.
Well, as you know, it's a pleasure for me to be here, since at one time in my life I worked for you. You were one of the 7 bosses upstairs when I was downstairs.
You were a great employee.
Well, thank you very much. The theme of this year's A Supreme Court evening is professionalism and leadership. What characteristics do you feel it takes to be a leader, particularly in the legal profession?
Honesty and truth are the hallmarks of good lawyers and good judges. But I also want to congratulate the people of Florida on having such a fine court system. I was in the court in the 1970s when cameras to courtrooms came into being. And before that time, people lost count of what happened in 1/3 of their government. That is, they didn't know what went on inside a courtroom. And the Florida Supreme Court led the way in making that popular throughout the country when other people said it would not work. Now every state of ours has adopted it. So I'm very proud that Florida led the way, and that was leadership in the legal profession.
That certainly was a change in what was happening out there, and I'm glad too that Florida did it. All our states have followed us, and I think everybody in the country is better off for it.
Well, to show you how important it was, in 2000 when we had a presidential case, the people of Florida were able to follow the case all the way through the Florida court system. But when the court case got to the federal court system, they lost count of what was going on in the case. And it was the most important case in our American history because it determined the president of the United States. And yet half the country could not see what was happening in their courts.
That's absolutely right. That was an amazing time in our history. Can you name examples other than that one of when the Florida Supreme Court played a definite leadership role in the past?
I was also on the court in the 1970s when we came up with a new disciplinary plan, that is for disciplined lawyers. And of course, the great thing was advertising by lawyers. And we set a great standard that's been followed by the country in lawyer advertising, and our process is so fair and open to those who are accused of wrongdoing as well as those who are harmed by the wrongdoing. And so I'm very proud that I was with the court at the time we set up that new disciplinary policy.
And that system has worked extremely well, both for the lawyers and, more importantly, for the public.
Absolutely. And so I'm proud also to have been a part of that. So those two things come to mind where Florida has led the nation when it came to the legal profession. One, cameras in courtrooms and disciplinary proceedings.
On behalf of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society, I am happy to present you with this Lifetime Achievement Award presented to you on this 28th day of 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Harkness.
I'd like to take a point of personal privilege. Everyone in this audience, everyone in the state of Florida in this profession knows Major Harding. Major Harding was Chief Judge of the 4th Judicial Circuit, he was Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, and he was Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. And since his retirement, he has been the lawyer extraordinaire everywhere. On December 31st of 2020, Major made a decision to stop practicing law and to not arbitrate and to not be a mediator, and just to spend his time with Jane. He is bar none our most beloved trustee, and I would like to say, for the person who has set the standard for professionalism for everyone in the state of Florida, on behalf of these trustees, Godspeed.
A Supreme Evening 2021 is the Society's main fundraising effort for the year, and we count on your membership and contributions to help support our educational programs and our work to preserve the Florida Supreme Court's long and vital history. You can support our mission by texting 218-788 to 855-575-7888, and a secure online form will be returned allowing you to renew your membership or make a direct contribution to the Historical Society's mission. You may also visit flcourthistory.org and press the donate button or copy and paste the link located in the Zoom chat box into any internet browser to access the donation form. Your contributions at any level are greatly appreciated and fully tax deductible.
And now for this evening's highlight, our keynote presentation. A renowned presidential historian, a contributing writer to the New York Times Book Review, a contributing editor at Time magazine, and winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He has authored more than a dozen historical books, including American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House, Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, Destiny, and Power, The American Odyssey of George Herbert Walker Bush, The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, and his most recent work, His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope. And as a sidelight, he was requested by the United States House of Representatives to write the tribute to the late John Lewis, to hang in the United States House of Representatives. Over the years, he has often been invited as a guest on various talk shows, such as Face the Nation, CBS This Morning, Late Night with Stephen Colbert, and MSNBC's Morning Joe. I would like to believe, somewhat presumptuously, that our guest's greatness comes from the fact that he graduated from the University of the South at Sewanee, Tennessee, that Sandy Dallenberg's greatness came from the fact that he graduated from the same college, and that my greatness came from the fact that I graduated from the same college. Given that this year's theme for Supreme Evening is professionalism and leadership, our guest has agreed to tailor his presentation to provide a historical view of American presidents and their approach to these concepts. We are honored beyond imagination that tonight we will be joined by Mr. Jon Meacham, live from his home in the great state of Tennessee. Mr. Meacham?
Thank you, Hank. A couple of comments in legislative terms as opposed to judicial terms to revise and extend your remarks. A, to be described as a renowned presidential historian is a little like being described as the best restaurant in a hospital. You want to win, but it's not that hard. And I'm sure your greatness comes from Sewanee, but basically my chemical addictions came from Sewanee. I sometimes think of the University of the South as a wonderful combination of Downton Abbey and Deliverance kind of put together. but I love the place as you do, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be here in a judicial setting with your work on the history of the court, not least because I'm the great grandson and grandson of judges from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in fact, our time together here in many ways begins when I was 6 years old, and my grandfather would take me down to the courthouse and the local hotel to have coffee with the local satraps. And we had a police commissioner in Chattanooga named Bookie Turner. And I asked my grandfather, why is he called Bookie? And my grandfather launched me on my career by saying, well, I think you should go ask. And so I went and trundled over to Commissioner Turner and said, Commissioner Turner, why do they call you Bookie? And he said, well, son, it's because I love to read. Now, the grand jury ultimately disagreed with him and found it more of an occupational description. But as it turned out, from that question, I have asked a lot more in ensuing years. We are at a remarkable point in the life of the Republic, obviously. Don't need to belabor that. No matter where you stand, you believe that there are fundamental things unfolding in the life of the nation that must either be sped up or arrested. And my argument about American history is that it's not a fairy tale. There's not a once upon a time, and there certainly won't be a happily ever after. But that history is our most important common vernacular, because in an era where we agree on so little about the basic facts of our ambient world, there is the possibility that the story of the country can offer us some common ground on which to explore who we've been, which of course, therefore, is inextricably linked to who we are and who we might want to become. People on the right tend to be open to this because history is sometimes seen as a conservative phenomena. It happened, therefore it's worth considering. Folks more on the left appreciate it as an Enlightenment era project, given that history is the only data set we have for human affairs. And so to me, there's a possibility in looking back to realize what Winston Churchill said in one of the last sentences we know that he wrote in volume 4 of the History of the English-Speaking Peoples. He wrote that the future is unknowable, but the past should give us hope. The future is unknowable, but the past should give us hope. And I believe that as deeply as I believe anything, because we, however imperfect we are, we have been on this journey toward a more perfect union. The great insight of the framers, many of whom were lawyers, of course, was fundamentally a Calvinist one, that we were fallen, sinful, driven by appetite and ambition. We were fallen, frail, and fallible, and we could be trusted mostly to do the wrong thing. And so therefore, the rule of law, the checks and balances, divided sovereignty, though rooted in the consent of the governed, though the enfranchised part of that population was remarkably narrow, those means were established for us to try to realize the ends that had been defined in many ways by John Locke as life, liberty, and property. Of course, Jefferson changed that to the pursuit of happiness in 1776. But without the means of law, without the means of custom, and I would argue without the means of conscience, therefore the ends are unrealizable. And so I want to take our time this evening to talk about 3 characteristics that I think have marked us in hours that are worth emulating, hours that have actually advanced the story of America. And I define advance as a fuller realization of the aspirations of the Declaration of Independence and a preservation of the constitutional order with amendments as reason and history and faith lead us to see whether those amendments are needed. And so you could argue that's kind of a Whig version of history. If so, guilty. I just would submit, for those who are cynical about that, tell me what year you'd like to go back to, if you could, and live in America. And if you're being honest about it, I can talk you out of it. We would not want to go back 100 years. Women have only had the suffrage now for a century. The segregated order that grew out of slavery and the failures of Reconstruction, the limitations on the mainstream, the limitations of prosperity, the failure of America to project the force it can project to create free markets and free peoples, to help create free markets and free peoples, has not always been used. And so we are really a different country. And in fact, we are the country we are only since 1965, when you think about it. 1968 was the first presidential election we had in this country where we did not have de facto apartheid in my native region and your region. So, and 1965 was also the year that President Johnson signed the Immigration and Nationality Act in New York Harbor, which set up the immigration patterns that shape who we are. And so when we think of ourselves as a multiracial, multi-ethnic, pluralistic, democratic republic, we're 55 years old, 56 years old. And so I would argue that there's no wonder that we have this populist, nativist, often racist, isolationist, these forces that ebb and flow. It's not surprising to me at all that they are flowing at this hour, because the nature of reality, whether you're looking at the first Klan or the second Klan, the isolationists who were the first America firsters in the 1930s, the forces of segregation, the white supremacist totalitarian police state that we basically had in this country, in this region for so long. These were all reactions to a fear of modernity. And fear, as Edmund Burke said, is the most unreasoning of emotions, which makes good sense when you think about it. If you feel your back is to a cliff, you're going to do everything you can to scratch and crawl your way off that, away from that edge. And I think that one of the great tasks of citizenship and of leadership in this era is to tell a story that allays those fears and actually makes a case for American hope and progress. Now, I'm not preaching a homily. This is not a revival meeting, but it is based on history. Who do we commemorate in this country? We commemorate liberators, not captors. Do you want to be Joe McCarthy, or do you want to be Margaret Chase Smith? Do you want to be Bull Connor, or do you want to be Martin Luther King or John Lewis? Do you want to be Abraham Lincoln, or do you want to be Andrew Johnson? I think the answer to those questions are all pretty clear. And so one of the things we have to do then is look at those examples and figure out what was it about those people and those moments that actually enabled those people and those moments to lead toward that more perfect union. And I think there were three characteristics that run through this. One is curiosity. Great eras, great leaders, great citizens are curious about the world around them. When Thomas Jefferson sat down in June of 1776 to write the Declaration of Independence, he was doing so not simply because he was a bright young politician of Virginia, though he was, but he was coming at the end of a 300 or 400 year period of an Enlightenment impulse in the Western world. So what had been going on? Gutenberg, the introduction of movable type, which democratized information and helped spread literacy and capitalism, the Protestant Reformations, the translation of sacred scripture into the vernacular, the scientific revolution, the European Enlightenment, the Scottish moral enlightenment, an entire reorientation of the world from being seen as vertical, where popes and princes and prelates and kings, who either by an accident of birth or an incident of election were given authority over all of us, was turning into a more horizontal one, where we were seen as all having been born with the capacity to determine our own destinies. And that shift found its fullest political expression in the American Revolution. It would not have happened without a generation of people who were engaged in understanding the currents that shaped the world in which they found themselves. And without that curiosity, and without that capacity to acknowledge and grapple with facts, even when, and perhaps especially when, they're inconvenient, the American experiment would have ended long ago. And so the first characteristic for leaders, for citizens, is curiosity. The second is candor. And I don't just mean in a Franciscan sense, tell the truth, Boy Scout way, although that's great, but being straightforward about the scope and scale and difficulty of national enterprises. There is no worse mistake, Churchill said, no worse mistake in public leadership than to hold out false hopes soon to be swept away. Churchill was speaking in a wartime context. FDR agreed. He said in February 1942 in a Washington's birthday fireside chat that the news is going to get worse and worse before it gets better and better, and the American people deserve to have it straight from the shoulder. Great leaders level with us. The covenant of modern democracies in many ways is if you give it to us straight, we'll do what it takes. But if you obfuscate, if you sugarcoat, if you directly lie, then that covenant is broken. And when you look back at American presidents who've gotten into trouble, almost always it's founded on that trouble is rooted in an inability or a reluctance to level with us, whether it's Vietnam or Watergate. And I'll stop there, but modern history, I think, also gives us a lot of examples, contemporary history. Churchill, again, is relevant here because, you know, the great speech, and you're all lawyers and historians, so you can probably do this with me, but, you know, the great text of modern defiance is Churchill's speech of June 4th, 1940, on the occasion of the evacuation of Dunkirk. And he said, and I'm roughly paraphrasing, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight on the seas and the oceans, we shall fight with growing strength and growing confidence in the air, we shall fight in the hills, we shall fight in the towns, we shall fight in the cities." And then he said, "And if this island, or a large part of it, were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world in all its power and might will step forth to the rescue and liberation of the old." Fascinating, right? Here he is sounding the trumpet like Gideon. And yet the end of that speech is a plea and a pledge to Franklin Roosevelt and to the New World to engage with the causes and agonies and possibilities of the world. He was leveling with his people. We'll fight, but if we're going to be victorious, we're going to need help. And that level of confidence and candor has characterized, I think, our finest hours, so to speak. The third is empathy. And by empathy, I don't simply mean being a good person, though I'm all for everybody being a good person. But fundamentally, empathy is the gasoline, it's the fuel of a democratic republic. Because if we don't see each other as neighbors, if we simply see each other as members of warring factions, then the covenant breaks down. Because some days I have to give you something, and some days you need to give me something. Some days I pay taxes to help you, some days you pay taxes to help me. Our interests are not going to be universally aligned all the time. You're lawyers, I'm a writer. You're Floridians, I'm a Tennessean. If we were in different regions, it would be something else as well. So the capacity to see ourselves as part of a whole, part of what Dr. King called the mutual garment of destiny, where what happens to one affects all, is not simply a kind of liberal coffee mug or tote bag slogan or quotation. It is, in fact, the living heart and the tangible reality of a democracy. Because if we are Hobbesian about this, if every day and every issue is a cause of the war of all against all, then we will have more January 6th. We will have a frayed and possibly broken republic. Because it requires, that experiment requires not unanimity, but Lord knows history and experience and reason tell us that it does require a capacity to reach out when you can and to take when you have to. And that's not homiletic. That is how the country has worked. And it doesn't always work very well. 100 years ago, if we had been here, what would be going on in the United States? Okay, women would just be now getting the vote, right to vote. In 1915, on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the Ku Klux Klan was refounded at Stone Mountain, Georgia, not that far from here. The flames from that cross went across the country. 2 to 6 million Americans joined the Klan in the 19-teens and 20s. 50,000 Klansmen marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in full regalia in 1925. 13 members of Congress and 5 United States senators were members of the Klan. 5 governors were members of the Klan. Texas and Georgia, which given American history is not that surprising. But how about this? Oregon, Colorado, and Indiana all had governors who were members of the Ku Klux Klan 100 years ago. Not that great, right? So how did we get out of it? We had a generation that was curious. They wanted to understand the anti-immigrant, anti-Black, anti-Semitic impulses. The press did a great job of writing about it. 2 presidents, Harding and Coolidge, spoke out against it. Judges in Oregon, New York, and at the Supreme Court in Washington made incredibly important and brave decisions that broke the back of the Klan. And think about it. If there had been an active, informed, vigorous Ku Klux Klan in 1933, when everything seemed to be falling apart and democratic capitalism itself seemed to be teetering on the edge, what Franklin Roosevelt managed to pull off would have been all the more difficult. This is not a partisan point. It is simply a historical one. The forces of nativism, the forces of isolationism, the forces of racism are perennial. Our finest hours are not ones in which we totally overcome those, because we can't totally overcome something that's in human nature. What we have to do is use the rule of law, use conscience to try to discern what is the best thing we can do. And one of the things Abraham Lincoln thought a lot about when he was in the White House was this role of self-love, this idea that we're fundamentally selfish. He was actually moved by the arguments of a man named Joseph Butler, who was an Anglican bishop who had written a book called Analogy of Religion, in which he argued a kind of utilitarian case for self-love, that we're going to love ourselves first and foremost. Loving your neighbor as yourself is a hugely revolutionary and radical idea. We're going to love ourselves more because that's in the nature of things. So we have to find a way to channel that and use the idea that we would love ourselves means we want to love ourselves when we're doing the right thing. And so the dictates of conscience become incredibly important. Without empathy, without the ability of standing in the other fellow's shoes, that entire thing collapses and we become Hobbesian. And I think the call of our time is to be more empathetic, to understand that we are in fact stronger together. That's what American history tells us. And the fact that that sounds even remotely partisan is a sign of the fact that this moment in American history will be studied forever as a moment where the basic bonds of our democratic culture frayed significantly. I want to leave you with this. So the most empathetic man I ever knew, not just politician, but man, was George Herbert Walker Bush. I was honored to be his biographer. Many of you I know voted for or voted against his son to be your governor. The Bushes lost a child to leukemia in 1953. Robin was her name. She was born in 1949. George W. had been born in 46. Jeb was born in early 53. And when they brought Jeb home from the hospital, Robin was tiring easily. She was bruising there in Midland. The Bushes took her to the pediatrician. The first time the Bushes ever heard the word leukemia was in the pediatrician's office in Midland, Texas. She survived about 6 or 8 months, died over the Columbus Day weekend in October of 1953. A letter I'd like to read to you is George Bush writing a letter to his own mother sometime about 5 years later. It was after Neil and Marvin had been born, but before Doro had been born in 59. And it's the letter of someone whom we sent to the pinnacle of power 30 years ago. And I think that it offers us both a political, but even more important, a human way forward. So this is the voice of George Herbert Walker Bush. I'm not going to do his voice, because as Dana Carvey once said, George H.W. Bush, to do a George H.W. Bush impression requires Mr. Rogers trying to be John Wayne. So I'm not going to do that for you. But here's George Herbert Walker Bush. There is about our house a need. The running, pulsating restlessness of the boys as they struggle to learn and grow needs a counterpart. We need some starched crisp frocks to go with all our torn-kneed blue jeans and helmets. We need some soft blonde hair to offset those crew cuts. We need a dollhouse to stand firm against our forts and rackets and 1,000 baseball cards. We need a legitimate Christmas angel, one who doesn't have cuffs beneath the dress. We need someone who's afraid of frogs. We need someone to cry when I get mad, not argue. We need a little one who can kiss without leaving egg or jam or gum. We need a girl. We had one once. She'd fight and cry and play and make her way just like all the rest. But there was about her a certain softness. She was patient. Her hugs were just a little less wiggly. She'd stand beside our bed until I felt her there. Silently and comfortable, she'd put those precious fragrant locks against my chest and fall asleep. Her peace made me feel strong and so very important. My daddy had a caress, a certain ownership, which touched a slightly different spot than the "Hi, Dad, I love so much." But she is still with us. We need her, and yet we have her. We can't touch her, and yet we can feel her. So in the course of writing about the 41st president, I asked him to read that letter out loud to me. And we were down in his office in Houston. And long before he finished, he broke down with an extraordinary level of physical crying. I'd never actually seen anything quite like it. And his chief of staff, a wonderful woman, heard what was going on and came in. And she asked me, why did you want President Bush to read that? And I said, well, if you want to know someone's heart, and before I could finish, the president jumped in and said, you have to know what breaks it. That's who we should be. Thank you.
Mr. Meacham, on behalf of our trustees, on behalf of our audience, and behalf of this nation, we thank you for your comments and your contributions to the character of our country. I would ask, would you consider taking some questions, since we have several from the audience who would like to ask them?
Absolutely.
But Mr. Meacham, you read the letter. You wrote a letter when you were 12 years old, and I believe that letter was written to President Reagan.
Yeah.
That precipitated an invitation to you at the age of 12 to attend his inauguration. Tell us about the letter. What prompted it, and what'd you say?
Well, I was fascinated by President Reagan, and I can't really explain why. There was a kind of ambient power and authority and reassurance. Obviously, when I was 11 and 12 years old, I wasn't thinking about supply side economics or the Pershing II deployment, but I was fascinated by it. I volunteered in Hamilton County, Tennessee, stuffed envelopes back when we did that. and was really swept up in the drama of politics. And I use that word advisedly, the story of it. It was incredibly important ultimately in what I ended up doing. I remember being at the inauguration. I was obviously thinking about it last week. And George H.W. Bush, of course, had been sworn in as vice president, was so excited he almost fell out of his car a couple of times. So I want to make a parenthetical point too. One of the things I'd urge everybody to think about is when we're talking about unity and consensus and the search for governing in an incredibly polarized country, although I'm increasingly unhappy about the language of polarization because it presumes that both sides are dug in and are somehow equivalent, but you didn't see the Democratic left storming the Capitol. And so I think we have to be careful about false equivalency. But I think one way to think about American politics in the last 180 years or so is that from 1933 to 2017, we had a kind of figurative conversation between FDR and Ronald Reagan. That is, that the consensus for all of our arguments, there was a certain consensus, which was, what is the role of the state in the marketplace? What's the relative role? And what's the relative projection of force against commonly agreed upon foes and rivals? And, excuse me, and we agreed on who those foes and rivals were. I asked, and I think that ran through President Obama. I've asked Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama if they agree with this, and they basically do, that they governed in the same universe. What we experienced in the last 4 years was not a sequential chapter to that. It was a more chaotic one. And I think in many ways, what President Biden is doing is, insofar as it is a restoration story, I don't think that liberal folks should be worried that somehow this is a restoration of an unhappy normalcy. I think it's the restoration of what I hope is a respectful and ultimately illuminating conversation about how we solve problems as opposed to simply projecting force in these constant wars.
Thank you. Mr. Meacham, following up on your analysis, and you said you know President Biden, there are some in the nation who I would fairly say or candidly say were a little taken aback to see that you apparently participated in the preparation of some of his speeches. Mm-hmm. Is that a shift with you personally on your political activities, or are you?
It's very much a shift in the last year or so, couple years, I guess. I believe that to whom much is given, much is expected. I am an incredibly fortunate practitioner of my craft, which is history, and I believe that the last 4 years presented an existential crisis for the kind of democracy I would like to live in and I would like to leave to my 3 children. And I think that that is not hyperbolic if you look at the evidence of January 6th and before. So Vice President Biden then is a friend of some long standing. We had several conversations in the run up to his running for president. I was honored that he asked on a couple of occasions for me to talk through and help him as he tried to figure out how to talk to the country about how we might overcome this, as St. Paul would say, the sufferings of this present time. And so I was honored to do that. I addressed the Democratic National Convention, which I can safely tell you when I was 12 years old, thinking about Ronald Reagan, that was not a place I expected to end up. But I think this was and I would think this, but you ask, I think this was a patriotic moment. And so I climbed out of the stands and got on the field.
Thank you. You mentioned in your initial remarks, Mr. Meacham, the quote, "The future is unknowable," end quote. Are we in a time or era that you think is comparable to a prior era in American history? Have we been through this before? I know your position would be we'll survive it, but have we been through this before?
Well, I hope we survive it. No, the multiplicity of, this has become somewhat conventional wisdom, but the multiplicity of crises that confront the incoming president are remarkable. Pandemic, racial justice, collapsing economy because of the pandemic, structural economic inequality, the gap between rich and poor, which is not an ideological point, it's simply a fact that since the ancient world, democracies and republics have not survived and thrived without a middle class. It's just when you end up with the few and the many, cataclysmic things happen. And so the repair and energizing of a middle class is vital. This feels a little bit like 1933 in terms of crises that can be addressed by technocratic and administrative means. And I think the president is particularly good at that. When you look at Biden, the tributaries of his life kind of led to this. 36 years in the Senate, 8 years in the White House, his personal story, you know, this makes sense, right? The more troubling, it's hard to imagine a sentence where you could accurately say more troubling, is what is some folks have called an epistemological crisis. This idea that you don't confront reality as we find it, but if you find it inconvenient, you simply deny it and invent another. And that's a cancerous, and I choose the word advisedly, that's a cancerous condition for a democratic republic based on reason, where we need curiosity, candor, and empathy. If we are dwelling in two different worlds that only intersect during primetime cable attacks or literal attacks on the Capitol, then that puts the entire experiment at risk. I am very careful, Hank, about not being hyperbolic. I can throw a wet blanket on your concerns faster than anybody, right? People will say, "Oh, this is terrible." I'll say, "Well, you know, John Tyler was pretty bad." You know, I can bore you for the next 6 days with various things. And Walter Lippmann, 100 years ago, 1921, wrote a book called Public Opinion, where he said the besetting problem of the modern world because of mass communications, and he meant the radio, was going to be that we would not see and then define, we would define and then see. And that has come true in this era. So I think the task that confronts the president, but I would suggest confronts all of us, is how do we rejoin, all of us, a reality-based community? And then we can disagree as much as we want about how to fix something or whether to even try to fix it. But you have to have a common agreement about what that something is. And that is not simply a presidential task. That's a task for everybody.
I'm going to call you John one time because you told me to beforehand, and I can now tell my friends I did it. So, John, you were quoted as saying of all the historical figures you would like to have interviewed, at the top of the list would have been Jesus of Nazareth, because Pilate did such a lousy job of it.
Did I say that?
Apparently you did.
That's a pretty good line.
Our time constraints, let me leave it with this. What is the message you'd like to leave everyone with tonight? You've got a significant audience out there here.
Sure.
People who are interested in what you're talking about.
Despair not, but work hard. I don't think we know how this is going to turn out. The Republic was as close to collapsing in the month in which we're sitting as it has been since 1861. In 1933, Wall Street bankers tried to overthrow Roosevelt, but it never got past the planning stages. There, but for the grace of God and a couple of Capitol Hill policemen who did the right thing, there could have been a massacre in the United States Capitol. It is amazing to me there aren't hundreds of people dead. and an attempt based on a lie, a self-evident lie, to overturn the will of the people. And Americans like to move on. We like to press ahead. We're not very good at looking back. Mark Twain got it exactly right. What did Huck Finn do at the end? He lit out for the territories. We can't light out for the territories quite yet because there are injustices and there is this epistemological problem, and it is pervasive, and totally seemingly rational neighbors of yours and mine believe things that are simply not true. And so what is our task? You're lawyers, you're officers of the court. You stipulate things. We don't have enough to stipulate to. And so we have to tell a story, not simply of expanding the Declaration, but a story of what you see is reality. You may not like it, but it is in fact reality. And the American Republic was founded on the insight that reason had to have at least a fighting chance against passion in the arena. So be in that arena, be an agent of reason, understand the passionate, empathize with them, walk in their shoes, but tell the story of the America that you want us to be.
2 words in the English language are thank you. Best to you, your family, to Vanderbilt, to Sewanee, and everywhere you go. Godspeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hank.
And this brings our evening to a close. On behalf of the trustees of the Society and our audience, we thank Mr. Meacham. We congratulate Justice Hatchett. We welcome our newest justices to the Supreme Court. And we thank our Chief Justice for sharing his thoughts about the state of our judiciary. And hopefully we see all of you next year in person in 2022. Good night.
A Supreme Evening 2021 is the Society's main fundraising effort for the year, and we count on your membership and contributions to help support our educational programs and our work to preserve the Florida Supreme Court's long and vital history. You can support our mission by texting 218-788 to 855-575-7888. And a secure online form will be returned allowing you to renew your membership or make a direct contribution to the Historical Society's mission. You may also visit flcourthistory.org and press the donate button or copy and paste the link located in the Zoom chat box into any internet browser to access the donation form. Your contributions at any level are greatly appreciated and fully tax deductible. Our platinum level sponsors: Ackerman, Brannock and Humphreys, Florida Justice Reform Institute, Greenberg Traurig, or Cook, Rigdon, Alexander and Rigdon, Stanley and Susan Rosenblatt, Searcy, Denny, Scarola, Barnhart and Shibley, the Florida Bar. Our gold level sponsors: Bedell Law Firm, Bishop and Mills, Buchanan Ingersoll Rooney, Carlton Fields, Gunster, J. Clausen Law, Edwards and Raggets, Grossman Roth Yaffa Cohen, Holland and Knight, David J. Sales, Terrell Hogan Law Firm, Weiss, Sirota, Helfman, Cole, Bierman. Our silver level sponsors: Boys, Schiller and Flexner, Boyd and Jennerat, Stearns Weaver Miller, Tim Chinaris. And our bronze level sponsors are listed here. We thank you all for your generous support of A Supreme Evening 2021.